Welcome back to the Hannahcast YouTube channel, and today I'm going to talk about the Critics' Choice Award category for Best Visual Effects, going through its history since 2009, and when I mean 2009, I mean the year that the movies came out. Now, I love the visual effects category at the Oscars. I just love seeing visual effects technology progress and see how more real things can look, and I just think it's absolutely fascinating. Admittedly, the winners, which are chosen not by just the visual effects branch, it is chosen by the overall Academy voting body. You know, the winners aren't always given to the most groundbreaking, innovative films. And instead it usually devolves into a popularity contest as to which was the best movie in the category. Because, and if you don't believe me on this, you know, you can just check the Visual Effects Society Awards yourselves and just see which ones won the categories in that awards body. You know what I mean. Here's how voting is done with the visual effects Oscar category. The nominees and the shortlists are determined by the visual effects branch of the Academy, meaning visual effects artists are choosing the nominees for best visual effects, but the winners are ultimately decided by the entire Academy, meaning most of the people voting for the winners know nothing about visual effects. Again, that's how you will see disparities between, let's say, the Oscar winners and the Visual Effects Society Award winners, like Godzilla Minus One beating The Creator, even though The Creator got nominated for the top prize at the Visual Effects Society Awards, and Godzilla Minus One didn't even get nominated. Or Blade Runner 2049, Interstellar, and Hugo beating the Planet of the Apes reboot trilogy for visual effects, despite the fact that the Planet of the Apes trilogy completely crushed those other films at the Visual Effects Society Awards. So, like, it kind of does come down to a popularity contest at the end of the day, but it's still a fascinating category nonetheless. But what happens if you take the visual effects category at the Oscars, and not only is it where the winners are not chosen by people who know visual effects, but also the nominees are chosen by people who don't know anything about visual effects. That's where you get the Critics' Choice Awards, where they basically do just pick their favorite movies with visual effects in them. And we're going to start with 2009. In that year, they had 2012, Avatar, District 9, The Lovely Bones, and Star Trek. Overall, not a bad category. I mean, obviously you had your three Oscar nominees in there, Avatar, District 9, and Star Trek, but the funny thing is, The Lovely Bones didn't even make it to round one of the shortlist at the Oscars, and ultimately, the shortlist at the Oscars was whittled down to 2012, Avatar, District 9, Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Star Trek, Terminator Salvation, and Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. And funny enough, at the Visual Effects Society Awards, the top prize, Outstanding Visual Effects in a Photoreal Feature, actually lined up with 5 of these films in the list, which were 2012, Avatar, District 9, Star Trek, and Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. So, like, The Lovely Bones on here, again, is very strange, and I've seen visual effects breakdowns of The Lovely Bones. It doesn't necessarily have bad visual effects, but admittedly, it just comes across as, like, more the beauty of the film, which is more production design than an actual visual effects achievement. Now, to people saying, well, production design is when you actually build the sets, that's not true. You need a production designer regardless if you're using CGI or if you're using practical sets. I mean, Avatar had production designers to create the design of the world of Pandora, and even in animated films, you need production designers. So yeah, CGI can absolutely be used in production design. It's just that the actual visual effects part of it is not what's the most groundbreaking. The next year we get to is 2010, which for some reason the Critics' Choice Awards only nominated 4 movies, and they were Alice in Wonderland, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1, Inception, and Tron Legacy. Again, this is very strange. They could have easily done 5 nominees, but if you're going to do 4, this is not a bad 4 to have. The Oscars slightly disagreed, where they didn't even nominate Tron Legacy, and instead they put in Iron Man 2 and Hereafter. But again, we're talking about 5 nominees. Obviously, Inception won, which makes sense. It swept everywhere, just like Avatar did. Then we get to 2011, which, again, we get to some strange circumstances here. We have Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, Hugo, Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Super 8, and The Tree of Life. Now, the Critics' Choice Awards going for Rise of the Planet of the Apes is interesting. In fact, they've gone with all 3 of the Planet of the Apes movies, whereas the Oscars, again, they did not even give it to Planet of the Apes. But also, you'll notice there is some disparity. Despite the winner, there are some disparities from this and the Oscar nominees. For one, The Tree of Life got in the Critics' Choice Awards despite not getting nominated at the Oscars, or even, to my knowledge, getting any nominations at the Visual Effects Society Awards. But also, what's interesting is that they have Super 8 in there for visual effects, despite the fact that it didn't even get shortlisted at the Oscars. I mean, again, like, Super 8 has pretty good visual effects, but I don't think I would nominate it for visual effects. I mean, there were some other stronger contenders, like, again, Captain America, The First Avenger, I thought would have been a better nomination. I thought Transformers Dark of the Moon would have ended up being a better nomination. I mean, there are a few things I would have gone with other than, like, Super 8. For comparison, let's compare the Critics' Choice Awards and the Oscars for the actual critical praise that their nominees for visual effects actually got. At the Critics' Choice Awards, the average Rotten Tomatoes rating for visual effects nominees since 2009 was 81.6%. Whereas at the Oscars, that number drops down to 79.9%. And that's since 2009, so I'm trying to be fair here. And to that point, let's compare the amount of Best Picture nominees that each body nominates. At the Critics' Choice Awards, the Best Picture nominees in the category for visual effects since 2009 was 31.3%, whereas the Oscars, that number drops down significantly to 20.5%. Not even a quarter of the visual effects nominees since 2009 were Best Picture nominees. Again, mathematically speaking, the Critics' Choice Awards are more likely to nominate movies that they like more, that have visual effects, than, judging the visual effects on their own merits. Because some people are going to try to say, well, they're just voting on what movies they feel like use the visual effects better. But I'm just going to say it, and this is something I've always said, that's just another way of saying I'm voting for my favorite movie with visual effects, because really think about that. What does that mean, the movie that used visual effects the best? Like, it's the visual effects that serve the story more. It's like every visual effects serves the story. The visual effects in the Transformers movies serve the story. This movie would not exist without visual effects, so inherently this movie is supported by its visual effects. It's such a vague thing to say, and again, it's just another code word for I don't want movies that I don't like getting nominated for visual effects. Because I guarantee you this, look at, let's say Godzilla Minus One. Godzilla Minus One, yeah, everyone cheered when it won visual effects, but I guarantee you this, if the movie was terrible, if everyone hated Godzilla Minus One, no one would be cheering for it to win Best Visual Effects. No one would be, because people have this inherent, apprehension to honoring movies for a specific craft, even though the movie itself may not be that great. It's kind of a bias that a lot of people have. Next, let's get to 2012, in which the Critics' Choice Awards nominated The Avengers, Cloud Atlas, The Dark Knight Rises, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, and Life of Pi. You'll see that this only went 3 out of 5 with the Oscar nominees, in which we had The Avengers, The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, Life of Pi, Prometheus, and Snow White and the Huntsman. The winner was Life of Pi, just like how it was at the Oscars and the Visual Effects Society Awards. Let's get to 2013, where this was a really interesting race. We had Gravity, The Hobbit: The Desolation of Smaug, Iron Man 3, Pacific Rim, and Star Trek Into Darkness. Now, this is fascinating because this was repeated everywhere. The Critics' Choice Awards, they nominated this 5. The Visual Effects Society Awards for Outstanding Visual Effects in a Photoreal Feature, they nominated all 5 of these movies. And even the BAFTAs nominated all 5 of these movies. And yet at the Oscars, Pacific Rim was taken out in favor of The Lone Ranger, which won the supporting visual effects category at the Oscars. Meaning, the film that may not be as visual effects heavy as some of these other films, but has sort of smaller visual effects, which is kind of funny considering how visual effects heavy The Lone Ranger is. But again, I love that nomination for The Lone Ranger. I think that's an awesome nomination, and probably would have even been my pick to win had Gravity not been there. But obviously, The Lone Ranger was never going to be nominated at the Critics' Choice Awards because everyone hated The Lone Ranger. See, that's a great example. Like, I love that the visual effects branch of the Oscars will go for movies, again, not well acclaimed at all by any means, but because The Lone Ranger was so innovative with its visual effects and was honestly kind of doing things that I'd never seen before in 2013, at least not done this well in such a large scale, with that whole train sequence. I just love that nomination. Then we get to 2014, where the nominees at the Critics' Choice Awards were Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Edge of Tomorrow, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, and Interstellar. Now, funny enough, again, this only went 3 out of 5 with the Oscar lineup, because at the Oscars, they nominated Captain America the Winter Soldier, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Guardians of the Galaxy, Interstellar, and X-Men Days of Future Past. Honestly, love all those nominees, and to be fair, Edge of Tomorrow is not a bad nominee, and so is, The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies, very good nominee. But again, I would have liked to see X-Men Days of Future Past at least in there. I would have probably nominated that over Edge of Tomorrow and The Hobbit. Although what's funny is that Edge of Tomorrow did not make the top 10 at the shortlist at the Oscars, which you'd probably consider wow, wait, really? And I think maybe the biggest surprise, considering, you'd probably expect Transformers to be on here. Yeah, you'd probably expect Maleficent to be on here. At least Maleficent, considering it got nominated for the top prize at the Visual Effects Society Awards. But I think the big surprise was Night at the Museum, Secret of the Tomb. No one expected that to happen. But I think that got in because, December release. And this is kind of a new thing I've been realizing. It's that when you look at the shortlists at the Oscars, you'll see a lot of the biggest surprises in the shortlist, and they'll usually be late releases. That's why I was kind of shocked to see Poor Things show up at the visual effects, shortlist at the Oscars, despite it not showing up anywhere at the Visual Effects Society Awards. And so I feel like having a December release, a very late release like that, really helps your case, because with late releases like this, these movies are probably being released as these shortlists are being formed, so the people making the shortlists probably have not seen these movies yet, and so they want to put them on the shortlist so that they can at least see them at the bake-off. But, if Night at the Museum had a release date of, let's say, in summer, the second film did, Battle of the Smithsonian, it probably wouldn't have gotten shortlisted, and we may have seen Edge of Tomorrow in that shortlist. But yeah, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes won at Critics' Choice, and Interstellar won at the Oscars. Then we get to 2015, where the lineup of nominees is expanded to 6, in which we have Ex Machina, Jurassic World, Mad Max Fury Road, The Martian, The Revenant, and The Walk. Now, what's interesting is that Star Wars The Force Awakens is not on here, but there actually is a reason for that. Because Star Wars The Force Awakens technically missed the deadline for submissions for the Critics' Choice Awards, so it wasn't eligible. Although, mysteriously, the Critics' Choice Awards, after the nominations were announced, said, oh man, we've heard this big outcry for Star Wars The Force Awakens to be nominated for Best Picture, so we're gonna do that. Even though a lot of critics themselves said none of us had that kind of outcry. We kind of understood the rules. So that's interesting, but yeah, you don't see Star Wars The Force Awakens on here purely because of that. I guarantee you, if Star Wars The Force Awakens was able to meet that deadline, it would absolutely be here. But all these films did make the shortlist. Admittedly, The Walk is kind of surprising, but again, you could probably chalk that up to, it's a big prestige film. People were kind of, at first, trying to get this movie into, the Best Picture race of the Oscars, but ultimately it didn't really go anywhere. Overall, nothing too shocking to my knowledge. That is where we get Mad Max Fury Road winning, which was its only major visual effects win, at least with the major precursors, because Star Wars The Force Awakens got the Visual Effects Society Awards for, outstanding visual effects in a photoreal feature, and Star Wars The Force Awakens also won the BAFTA. But at the Oscars, it actually just went to Ex Machina. And I don't really know how to explain that, other than maybe you could argue that Ex Machina only kind of prevailed because like all the other films had such strong cases to win, because you had 3 Best Picture nominees, one of which being The Tech Giant, which was Mad Max Fury Road, the movie that was at least going to win Best Picture, which was The Revenant, and then The Martian, which nobody was really nominating for any vote, or at least choosing the winner for anything in that film. So you could probably argue that some people would just want to throw it a visual effects bone because, it's got to win something. And then you had Star Wars The Force Awakens, which was technically the sweeper up to that point. Like, it won every major visual effects category that it got nominated for. And so that probably allowed for Ex Machina to slip through the crack under the door and just probably barely win the Oscar. Then we get to 2016, where we have Arrival, Doctor Strange, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, The Jungle Book, and A Monster Calls, which admittedly that's kind of surprising, considering A Monster Calls did not even make the 20 film round 1 shortlist at the Oscars. And when it came to the final nominees, Arrival and Fantastic Beasts didn't get nominated. So instead, the Oscars went for Deepwater Horizon, Kubo and the Two Strings, and Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. And I am really glad Arrival didn't get an Oscar nomination for visual effects. It's a great movie, but let's face it, it's not the most innovative achievement in visual effects. It's just a very beautiful film in terms of like art direction and cinematography, and definitely like sound design. But visual effects, you don't really need to give it visual effects for that. Like, Deepwater Horizon had amazing destruction sequences, probably some of the best fire I've ever seen, like digital fire I've ever seen up to that point. Kubo and the Two Strings, very inspired nomination with its, big fantasy epic action sequences, but done in stop motion. And then Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, I mean, it's Star Wars, you can't really go wrong with that. But of course, they had the sense to give it to The Jungle Book. Obviously, yeah, if anything else won, that would have been absolutely criminal, because The Jungle Book absolutely deserved that. Then we get to 2017, and this is where they really start pushing forward into the favorites, because we got Blade Runner 2049, but other than War for the Planet of the Apes, we got some very strange contenders: Dunkirk, The Shape of Water, Thor Ragnarok, and Wonder Woman. I know, granted, even back then I was predicting Dunkirk and The Shape of Water, but Thor Ragnarok and Wonder Woman for visual effects? Like, really? Like, what did those two movies do that, let's say Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Kong Skull Island did better? Because obviously, yes, Star Wars The Last Jedi, that was not eligible because it missed the deadline. But it's like, really? Like Wonder Woman and Thor Ragnarok? But again, you look at the Rotten Tomatoes scores for those movies, and more critics really liked Thor Ragnarok and Wonder Woman way more than Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and Kong Skull Island. And same thing with Dunkirk and The Shape of Water. Like, I would not nominate those movies either. In fact, if I'm being honest, I feel like the Oscars got all the nominees right that year. We're starting to see a real escalation with visual effects being given to movies that are the most acclaimed, at least when it comes to the nominations, and definitely the winners later on. But, I think that one of the reasons might be because, as the years go on, more visual effects movies are made, and so people are more desensitized to visual effects, and so that's when they start inevitably just picking favorites. But then we get to 2018, and this is when I just stopped taking the Critics' Choice Awards seriously for visual effects. This is when it just did it for me. When they gave Black Panther the win for visual effects. And the other nominees were Avengers Infinity War, First Man, Mary Poppins Returns, Mission Impossible Fallout, and Ready Player One. What the hell were you thinking, Critics' Choice? Like, the visual effects was like the one thing in the movie that you criticized. And yet you give it Best Visual Effects, because when are we ever going to nominate a Marvel movie for Best Picture ever again? This was stupid. They know this is stupid. There's no excuse for this. Again, I'm not shitting on the actual visual effects people behind the movie, because like the reason why the movie's visual effects were so bad was because of like the studio just not giving them enough time or money to finish that train sequence. But I have to call it as I see it. Like, the visual effects in the movie were just not good. And like, even if they gave it to the Oscar winner First Man, which granted I would have given it to Avengers Infinity War, but like First Man would at least not be infuriating. It's like, all right, I'll accept it. I'll accept that. But that's just dumb. And also, Mission Impossible Fallout, again, got nominated here despite not making the shortlist for visual effects because, again, it was like the most acclaimed action movie of that year that wasn't Black Panther. Whereas when we look at the Oscars for visual effects, their nominees, they had the sense to not only nominate Solo: A Star Wars Story, but Christopher Robin, probably one of my favorite underdog visual effects nominations ever. Like, the effects in Christopher Robin are so flawless. But again, the Critics' Choice Awards, they don't want to nominate a movie like Christopher Robin because we don't love that movie. Now, granted, they didn't hate Christopher Robin. The critics liked Christopher Robin enough. But again, you compare the Rotten Tomatoes scores to any of these movies in this category, and you compare that with Christopher Robin, they were never going to nominate Christopher Robin for visual effects. And then we get to 2019, where for some reason we have 7 nominees. Again, like, good God, you don't need to nominate every movie out there. They nominated 1917, Ad Astra, The Aeronauts, Avengers Endgame, Ford v Ferrari, The Irishman, and The Lion King. Obviously, Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker was not here because missed the deadline again. Okay, let's just talk about the nominees, because the nominees are already kind of fucky as is. Ad Astra, The Aeronauts, and Ford v Ferrari. Now granted, The Aeronauts and Ford v Ferrari got nominated for Best Supporting Visual Effects at the Visual Effects Society, but they didn't make the shortlist. They didn't make the shortlist, so like, why are they here? And same thing with Ad Astra. Hell, Ad Astra didn't even get nominated for anything at the Visual Effects Society Awards. And look, I have seen Ad Astra, and some of the stuff is kind of cool, but it's not the most technically innovative film in the category. It's just, yeah, some of the imagery is very pretty, but I think that just goes more to like the cinematography and the production design and stuff like that. Which again, there are visual effects in this movie, don't get me wrong. But it's, again, you compare this to other space movies, like even First Man, Interstellar, Gravity, Ad Astra is just not that impressive in comparison. And let's just get to the winner, Avengers Endgame. Again, why? Now, granted, this is not as bad of a winner as Black Panther was. Like, the visual effects in Avengers Endgame are not bad, but why didn't you just give it to Avengers Infinity War? Infinity War was the more innovative of the two because they literally created Thanos in Infinity War. Like, that's where the true innovation was. And I'm not saying that there wasn't any innovation in Avengers Endgame. I think obviously there was enough to give it a nomination. But like, The Lion King was like the most groundbreaking achievement in visual effects that year, or even if you don't want to give it to The Lion King, whatever. Not even The Irishman, and how at that point in time, that and Gemini Man were like the best achievements in de-aging people. Like, you don't even want to give it to that. You just gave it to Endgame because, well, we gotta give Avengers Endgame something because the people are gonna like that. It's dumb, it's stupid. Then we get to 2020, which I like to call the asterisk year for visual effects, because this was like the worst competitive year for visual effects maybe ever, although granted, 2023 was also pretty rough. But regardless, the Critics' Choice Awards nominated Greyhound, The Invisible Man, Mank, The Midnight Sky, Mulan, Tenet, and Wonder Woman 1984. And obviously they went for Tenet. Which granted, like, they probably could have given it to Mank, but, Tenet was, like, the closest thing to a big blockbuster, and also, it was much more well-acclaimed than some of these other films on the list. Now, granted, let me just break some of this down. Greyhound, I don't mind that nomination. The Invisible Man, this is a bit of a hot take. I don't think The Invisible Man should have ever gotten into the visual effects race, and luckily it didn't even get shortlisted. Because, like, I mean, yeah, The Invisible Man is a great movie, but again, in terms of visual effects, it's not the most innovative thing in the world. And even in the grand scheme of things, it's not like it's like, ironically enough, invisible effects. Like when you see like the actual suit, it's like pretty clearly CG. Mank is definitely trying to emulate, the feel of, the 1930s or whenever Citizen Kane came out. And there are like CG animals in the movie or CG fire pits. It's like, well, yeah, it's kind of, that's a little bit breaking the illusion. So I think that actually was a flaw I had with Mank. I don't think that needed to be in there. The Midnight Sky, that should have won. Mulan, I don't like the fact that Mulan's in there, although granted, like, it was kind of all over the place except at Visual Effects Society. Like, it didn't get nominated for the top prize there. Tenet, again, I don't think should have been nominated. And Wonder Woman 84, admittedly, it didn't make the short list, but man, I'm not gonna lie, I think maybe I would have put it in the short list and maybe a nomination. I mean, because like it's like one of the few blockbusters out there. The effects in Wonder Woman 1984 aren't absolutely terrible for the most part, but then again, I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't nominate it. It's tough. If I were to nominate it, it would be a number 5, or it would just be outside of the nominations. But regardless, the Oscars actually kind of had, for the most part, a better lineup of nominees. They had Love and Monsters, great nominee for that year. The Midnight Sky, Mulan, the one and only Ivan, which again, that one's a great nomination, and Tenet. But although, let's just be real, none of these movies would have ever been nominated for visual effects if the pandemic never happened, so 2021, this is one where just one of them was just extremely baffling to me, where we have Dune at 1, The Matrix Resurrections, Nightmare Alley, No Time to Die, and Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. Alright, Nightmare Alley. What? Before the trailer even came out for Nightmare Alley, I looked up like the synopsis, because everyone was trying to predict Nightmare Alley for visual effects back then. And I was looking up everything I could about Nightmare Alley before the, trailers came out. And I was like, how is Nightmare Alley going to be a visual effects kind of film? I mean, because, yeah, you could probably say, well, yeah, maybe some like, CG backdrops and some, like, very little things, but in the grand scheme of things, why would it get in? And then, sure enough, the Critics' Choice Awards nominate Nightmare Alley, and despite the fact that Nightmare Alley was nominated for Best Supporting Visual Effects at the Visual Effects Society Awards, it was beaten by Last Night in Soho, a way more deserving nominee. Again, the Critics' Choice Awards. Why would you nominate Nightmare Alley? That doesn't make any sense. Again, they only nominated it because they nominated it for Best Picture, and it was like a big tech player, so they went, oh, okay, we'll just put it in visual effects. You saw Nightmare Alley. What visual effects are you talking about that is worthy of a nomination like this? What visual effects in Nightmare Alley would you not find in a lot of other movies? Like most other movies of this kind of caliber. Whereas with the Oscars, they nominated Dune, Free Guy, No Time to Die, Shang-Chi, Spider-Man No Way Home. Now granted, Spider-Man No Way Home wouldn't have been eligible anyway because it missed the deadline, but yeah. Although one thing that is kind of funny is that The Matrix Resurrections got nominated like everywhere. It got nominated for the Critics' Choice Awards for visual effects, the BAFTA for visual effects, and even the top prize nomination at the Visual Effects Society Awards. And yet The Matrix Resurrections still missed a nomination. And then we get to 2022, which again, we get to some very strange circumstances. Although, really at the same time, they did go 4 out of 5 with the Oscars. They nominated Avatar: The Way of Water, The Batman, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever, Top Gun: Maverick, but they also nominated Everything Everywhere All at Once and RRR. Those two, very strange, considering they did not even get shortlisted for visual effects at the Oscars. But, however, what do Everything Everywhere All at Once and RRR have in common? That's right, they were nominated for Best Picture at the Critics' Choice Awards. Again, very interesting observation. As the years go by, the Critics' Choice Awards nominate more and more and more films nominated for Best Picture in Best Visual Effects. And with RRR, it probably was like, well, we gotta give RRR some awards, so we'll throw in visual effects in there, even though it didn't really have the most amazing visual effects out there. And again, I mean, it's not necessarily a flaw with the movie, because it's like, that's the style of the film. It is goofy and silly, but in the grand scheme of visual effects, when comparing it to the competition, it's not really a nomination worthy achievement. Whereas with the Oscars, they replaced Everything Ever All at Once and RRR with All Quiet on the Western Front. Which is interesting because the Critics' Choice Awards actually did nominate All Quiet on the Western Front for Best Foreign Language Film, but they didn't nominate it for Best Visual Effects. But then again, you could also make the argument that All Quiet on the Western Front was a very, very, very late bloomer. And then you get to 2023, where this year was just absolutely a clusterfuck for the visual effects category. Not just at Critics' Choice, but kind of everywhere, because it was also a very weak year. I'll probably put like a small asterisk on the 2023 for visual effects, because good God, the competition was not very strong. Other than like a few films, like maybe like The Creator, Guardians 3, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, it was kind of like, eh. But regardless, the Critics' Choice Awards, they nominated The Creator. All right, cool. Guardians 3, great. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Why? Oppenheimer, Poor Things, and Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which, hey, yeah, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, very good nomination. Look, yeah, Mission Impossible got nominated for the Oscar. I still don't know why it did. Actually, no, I know why it did. It was a weak year. But I knew they were going to give Oppenheimer Best Visual Effects. I knew they were going to do that because, again, this is like the big Best Picture frontrunner, and everyone was so mad that Oppenheimer didn't get shortlisted for visual effects at the Oscars, despite the fact that it just didn't deserve it. The actual nuclear explosion in the movie didn't look anything like a nuke. It looked like a 30-foot gasoline explosion and, like, had no momentum behind the blast at all. So it's like, no, you don't. Like, why? It did not deserve visual effects. And then Poor Things, again, does not deserve a visual effects nomination. And the fact that it won the BAFTA, my God, that's also really stupid. Because again, look at Poor Things. Poor Things didn't even get nominated for a single thing at the Visual Effects Society Awards. Now, people will try to say, well, Oppenheimer got nominated for the top prize of the Visual Effects Society Awards. Okay, yeah, but let's also bear this in mind. One, again, weak year. Two, if Oppenheimer was to be nominated, it shouldn't have been nominated for Outstanding Visual Effects No Photoreal Feature. It should have been nominated for Outstanding Supporting Visual Effects No Photoreal Feature, because none of the the amount of effect shots in this movie are lower than just about all the films that were nominated in the other in the actual supporting visual effects category. And so it kind of felt like the Visual Effects Society didn't really know what to do, because most of the competition was just not really strong, or in the case of Dune, delayed. And so I think it was more like a consolation prize, where it's like, man, everyone got really mad at us when we deservedly so didn't shortlist it for visual effects at the Oscars. So here, we'll just throw a bone its way in. The Critics' Choice Awards visual effects category is stupid, because they really only play towards the fact that they will nominate and vote for the movies that they love the most, without much consideration for the actual visual effects technology itself. I'm willing to bet I'm going to make a bunch of enemies with this video, but them's the facts, kid. What are your thoughts on the Critics' Choice Awards for visual effects? What do you think of them choosing Black Panther for visual effects? Let me know in the comments below what you think. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because if you don't, Black Panther and Oppenheimer will continue winning visual effects awards.